So, good afternoon to all the participants in this webinar on Working and Leading Across Borders, organized by the Postgraduate Executive Masters in International Business. So it is our pleasure to hold this event, and I mean that under, the name of Pedro Vieira, the co-coordinator of the course, and myself. It is really a privilege and a pleasure because this webinar is very special for us. Although our Executive Master starts only in October, this is a major milestone in our opinion because we count with two extraordinary speakers that I shall immediately introduce. And I would like to thank all of you for being here, but I would like very specially to thank on our behalf to the speakers. We have Luisa Delgado today and Natalie Rizashi. And these are two very important role models, as far as I'm concerned, and really top managers, world-class, that I hold in the highest possible regard. So it will be not only a pleasure, but a privilege to have you here today. So let me briefly introduce our speakers. That, of course, it's a very short introduction that doesn't do justice to their vast curriculum, but I will try to summarize. So Luisa Delgado is an entrepreneur, an investor, board chair and director, and advisor to several business groups, from large corporates to startups. She has although you won't believe, but she has about 3 decades of experience in leadership and management experience at companies, notably Procter & Gamble, where she was, for instance, CEO of the Nordic region, and prior to that, head of human resources for Western Europe, comprising 17 countries. Luisa also led SAP's Human Resources Division, where she was an executive board member. And from 2013 to 2018, she was CEO of the reputed Safilo Group, the world's second largest premium eyewear group. Further to that, more recently, she created her own investment fund focused on luxury products. And today, Luisa Delgado provides her vast knowledge and experience as a board member to various companies, including the INGKA Holding and IKEA Group, a consumer electronics company. So she will join IKEA Group as an independent director this November. So thank you so much, Luisa, for being here. I'm also very grateful and very privileged to have here Natalie Risacher. Natalie was and still is for us a major member of the Porto ecosystem, entrepreneurial and corporate ecosystem. So she's currently global head of human resources, support and control functions, and global head of corporate culture at Natixis. She's currently in Paris, to our loss. We loved having you here in Porto until recently. Nathalie Risacher lived recently in Porto because she was senior country manager at Natixis in Portugal and chief operating officer of Natixis Corporate and Investment Bank for the region EMEA. She really transformed the operation in Portugal to a really world-class operation that really transformed the way the group operates. She was also Chief Security and Operational Risk Manager at Natixis CIB Americas. Nathalie was also board member of the Chambre de Commerce et d'Industrie Luso-Française, member of the advisory board of the French-American Chamber of Commerce in New York, member of the board of directors of Les Conseillers du Commerce Extérieur de la France, and member of the board of trustees at FIAF, the French Institute Alliance Française. So, and then the moderators will be myself and Pedro Vieira, who I'm very, very fortunate to have as co-coordinator of this executive master. So I'm going to kick this discussion that I'm sure will be something very enlightening to all of us on working and leading across borders with a little provocation to Luisa and to Natalie. Luisa and Natalie, what do you consider to be the most difficult trying challenging situations as leaders of people who are the most difficult assets to manage.
Shall I go?
Yes,
you go, Luisa.
I will start, and it's not because this discussion is about culture, but I do think the most challenging, and if you get it right, the most fantastic thing is to bring together cultures that maybe by their underlying foundations are different, and do 1 + 1 is 3 or more, because you get the cultures to flourish, but also to complement each other because they know and understand each other into something that elevates it to more. But the most difficult thing is if you don't get this right and you don't understand it and don't listen. And I think it was some years ago, there was an important thing that we used to say, listen to the sounds of the forest, right? i.e. for culture, you have to listen and sense things that go deeper than what's at the surface. And if you don't manage that, there's nothing more difficult in leading people and organizations, in my experience. I don't know, Nathalie, how have you seen it?
I agree with you, Lisa. It's definitely quite a challenge. I will say, I mean, the main challenge is really around differences. And as you mentioned, putting people together, coming from different culture. So what I experience, I will say the most challenging things is really to build trust. And it's the most challenging, but also the most successful factor when you build a global team. And the reason why it's challenging is because it's harder, I think, to build a relationship between people when you have people coming from all over the world, because it's easy to misinterpret each other's intentions. It's really easy to make incorrect assumption because we have a lot of prejudice and negative cultural stereotype. And so trust is always important, but when you have a cross-cultural team, I think it's more difficult to build, but it's more important to have than a regular, I will say, team. And also the propensity to trust is different from one culture to another. So that makes the equation quite difficult because it is influenced by historical, sociological, psychological characteristics that make definitively this building the relationship and building trust between the team quite challenging.
Yes, it is, and this point is quite interesting because how do you create trust? We see that in some cultures it can be more relationship based, in some other cultures more task based, right? So how do you deal with that? How do you build trust with the different people from different cultures you work with?
I can. You want to go, Luisa?
No, you go.
So just to continue with my thought, actually, I mean, the way I view trust, actually, I view three fundamental, three foundations. First, I mean, you trust people. I mean, when you trust someone, you can base on your, on that person's abilities, on their result. So they are good, they are doing a good job, so you trust them. It can also be based on caring. They go beyond their self-interest, and so you trust them. And the third component that I see, it's integrity. They are honest, credible, so then you trust them. And abilities and caring can be viewed differently from one culture to another, to what I experience. For example, I mean, as I say, I spent almost 20 years in the US, and in the US, it's really all about results. And someone who performed its job duties well with great results, people are more trusting that person. Versus in France, and I believe in Portugal, it's the caring part is much valued to build that trust relationship. I'm not saying the result is not, but the caring part is important. But what I experience is that one thing that is true everywhere, I mean, almost everywhere, is integrity. Integrity is really something that it's fundamental in building a trust relationship when you have a cross-cultural team. Now, how to do that? I will say when people are aware about their own and also other preferences in the way to build trust, the organization, a global organization, must develop a way to support cross-cultural trust building. And you can do that with allowing employees, for example, to collaborate in low-risk environment where they can spend time together and socialize and better know each other. You can also do, and we have done that a lot at Natixis when we built Natixis in Portugal, it's some cross-cultural training. So people better also know how other people can view that trust and how you can also, between the team and the cross-cultural team, how you can allow them to really have that opportunity to better understand and build that trust together.
Yes. I fully agree with what you say, Nathalie, and I think the three angles that you outline, the differing emphasis that different cultures may give to one or the other, I have experienced that as well. I think underlying even those three items is the creation of a transparency of why am I here? Because with our glasses, we assume that, the Portuguese is this, the Swiss is that, and, right? And if you are able to take away those glasses and really go deep and say, what is your motivation? As an individual, you also may find out that all the stereotypes about national culture are actually not, valid. I have, by the way, seen that culture in industries is just as strong, if not even stronger, than national culture. If you look at the luxury and the fashion culture, it's extremely strong. And there are codes and beliefs and values within it that are totally nationally, comprising. They're not national, they are cross-national, but they are very, very rigid. And in that sense, this going deeper, I think, is important. Now, in my experience, if you lead an organization that is multicultural across different nationalities, I think the real glue comes when you're able to shape together a purpose that is common. And if you have that common reason to believe, right, that we are here for something that, by the way, is more than just making money, but it is here to also make an impact by doing good business, doing something bigger than ourselves, then I think you are able to transcend across different ways to go about it, culturally determined. And, for me, the best examples of that I have had the pleasure and still am involved with, on the one side, my past at Procter & Gamble, where that strong values and culture left space for local specificities. And I'll give you an example as to the Nordics and Portugal, which were two countries I lived in for P&G, among other 6 or 7. And on the other side, IKEA. I don't know whether any of you have noticed, but you go to an IKEA store, whether that is in La Madeleine in Paris or in Shanghai or in the California or in Alfragil, or by the way, also up in Porto, there is a commonality that transcends this local place, but it is still rooted in the local place, right? And for example, you get a hot dog in Sweden at the exit, you buy, but it's cheap, or you can buy it in Italy and you get a slice of pizza, right? So there is a certain adaptation, but the principles and the value and the purpose above all of the company are cross-reaching across nationalities. And I think that's very, very important to understand. Now, I read a book, and I think that's one I wanted to share with all of you that really marked me on local culture and its impact to the business. And the book is old now. It's called Israel Startup Nation. It's a fantastic book, and it explains why the context in Israel is so good and so encouraging systemically. It's not just one or the other for startups. And it has to do so much with values, with the context of value that, you know, a failure is not a failure. A failure is an opportunity to learn and do better next time. If you're in a context like this, startups thrive because people try out, right? And by definition, not all startups are successful. But if you are then blamed societally as the one who failed, you will never try in the first place, right? And on it goes. But I think there is something fantastic about culture as that currency that allows to do more if taken and understood rightly. And I noticed this when I lived in Nordic very, very much. You know, the culture in Nordic is very different from many, many others in Europe. It is a trendsetter for stuff that typically takes much longer in other places, particularly if you are in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. You know, you will actually, in P&G at a certain point, we thought Nordic were really a pain in the neck, to be honest, and to be plain, because they always wanted to do things different. They wanted other products. They didn't like chemicals, and, you know, why bother? And then there are very few up there in the north. Until you say, wow, maybe that's a culture that's predictive of the future, as opposed to a disturber of today, and could be a disruptor of the future. And I think it is really looking at cultural attributes on the what are they giving that others don't give. And I'm a big believer. I come from a very small language in Switzerland called Romansh. We're just, latest count, I think, is 52,000 people. Every time we're fewer. So, you know, I hope somewhere it stops declining. But I learned there that, you know, speaking another language and not speaking the main languages is not a negative. It's actually a plus. And if you start looking at cultural differences or diversity as a plus, as opposed to a gap you have to fill, then I think you can bring cultures together and really make them thrive also as a sum.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on some aspects you mentioned, Luisa, because I think our conversation is heading to a very interesting, place, because it's really important to understand these various dimensions, overlapping dimensions of culture, because when you start talking about culture, yes, there is this, so to speak, less sophisticated view that is only national culture. And in fact, as you were discussing, it has to do also with the culture of the group, of the company, of the industry or sector. And sometimes I wonder if culture is so important after all, in all circumstances. And may I add one dimension, because when I was introducing Luisa, I was meaning that Luisa, and also it happened to Nathalie, you were senior managers when you were very young. And at that time, this has to do with culture seen from, so to speak, an age group perspective. It's another dimension, because both of you were top executives and successful very young, both rooted on technical knowledge, on various soft skills that you have, of course. But at the time, you were dealing with, I'm sure, lots of older men. By that time, diversity probably was not what it is today. Now, both of you, as I see your latest years, you have been inspiring lots of members of the younger generation, of people from startups, also the center that Nathalie founded here in Porto, with hundreds of young engineers, people that are very, very talented. So do you see the differences in culture so strongly, so to speak, in the most experienced generation? And what about these young people? Are they more homogeneous? Is culture so important for this young and digital generation?
I mean, I can go back. I mean, I can respond on that, and I will continue on what Luisa has said earlier. Actually, to respond to your question, Anna, it's a yes. Luisa mentioned the fact that culture is something, it's really what's bring people together. And it's what make people have a good reason to go to work, have a good reason to this common glue that actually Luisa, that was the terminology that Luisa used, which I like it very much. That common glue for the youngest generation is even more important. They make an impact. It's super important for a younger generation. They don't want to wake up and go to work just because they have to check the box and get their pay stub at the end of the week or at the end of the month. They want to go to work because they want to have an impact. They want to have a purpose, a reason why they are going there. And I think this is really why also for this generation is becoming more and more important to have this raison d'être, as we say it in French, that is also used in English, this really purpose on why we want to serve our customer, why we want to bring that business, why we want to work together, why we want to expand to a vision. We need the why more than the how. This is really something that is important, and culture is really part of it. I mean, one thing, the way I'm viewing culture in a company is really, it's really the culture determine what people do when no one else is telling them what to do. Mm-hmm. In other words, you can have values. So you have values, usually it's top down, and those values, they are published. Sometimes it can even be some type of buzzword to do some marketing. But the culture is really the way people are going to work together, the way people are going to operate together, the way they are going to present themselves to the outside world, to their customer, the way the customer will view them. So it's really a lot about things that are not said, but the way you act. And that's the reason why I say it's really what people do when you're not telling them to do. And a company with a strong culture is really, I mean, today is definitively a company that has a lot of diversity, as you mentioned, Anna, that is inclusive and that really embody their values, that really act the way they say they are. And on the young generation, those are the things that are super important compared to when I start job, you have a job, you're happy to get the job and you stay to that. Today is different. And this is something that especially a global company really need to integrate. There is this beautiful book also to talk about book of what's his name, Peter Drucker. It was back to 2006, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And what he mean at that time is that you can have a beautiful strategic plan, but if you do not integrate the culture will enable you and your people to really execute that strategy. And I think today is as important as it was in 2006 that a company cannot afford to stick only to a strategic plan. And if they do not launch and making sure that people embrace that culture while executing that strategic plan, it will be a fail.
Yeah, I agree very much to everything you said, Nathalie, and we didn't discuss this ever between us, but I think this idea that just a cerebrally developed strategy means nothing if it is not executed through capabilities, through an organization design, and all that permeates it, which is the culture, the values. And I'm involved in some companies where actually strategy is a very light exercise. It's a couple of choices, but it is carried by purpose and value and such a clarity in that they are incredibly agile. I think the past way of doing strategy for a year and a half, very intellectually, whatever, I think the world is not anymore done for this. I think it has moved into, yes, strategy, but enough, not too much. And yes, culture as much as you can, and purpose that makes people, clearly empowered to go. And I think that ultimately is important. Now, on the age stuff, Anna, I don't want to be polemic, but I hate it when we talk about old people and young people, and I feel that I'm being put into the old group that is supposed to be old-fashioned, and then there is all these young people, and they're all all going ahead. I know you didn't mean that, but I have a different theory on this. I think it is all about tribe, and it's about tribes who share certain things. And it's very transversal on age, because I meet young people who, are, in my view, are prematurely aged, okay? And then I meet older people who have remained young and are actually just as young as the others. And I'm talking here spirit-wise. So I think, yes, there is a generational trend, no doubt. And perhaps when, you know, we all were in our teens or early 20s, we were part of that as well. So I think the tribes is what's important. And there's no doubt that society and the zeitgeist has moved towards the why and doesn't just take the how and the what, you know, as a top-down exercise, right? And wants to be part of it and has a different expectation, which then I think also travels across cultures more easily, because again, you go to the highest common denominator as opposed to a narrow execution, particularly when it was control command and, you know, very, very narrow and reductive. So I think there is something in that, but there's no doubt that, you know, a company in today's world, it's about diversity, you know, it's about including, and it's inclusion and making, you know, people empowerment. I think it goes beyond inclusion, it goes into empowerment, and that goes across many, many areas, and age is clearly part of that as well, in ways that, again, can be very, very powerful. I think a startup with a experienced either angel investor or coach or something can be extremely powerful for both sides, because everybody learns, right? And you really take the best of both. But it must be accompanied with a culture, and there we perhaps go to some of my Portuguese experiences that are fantastic. I've been married here to a Portuguese for 32 years, so something, you know, has worked. But the point is, the Portuguese culture, a bit like other Southern European cultures, Italy in my experience was similar, gives a lot of respect to age. And that is not good. Because it means that from an innovation perspective, if there is this well-named respect, and it's lovely. In Nordic, it's the other way around. You know, if you're the boss and you're older, you better prove yourself every day, because people don't take you as a given, right? Which is exactly the other way around. But there is a certain authority respect, at least in my experience, and this may not be generalized, which I think as a leader, one needs to make sure you don't count on it, but you actually open it and let it be questioned, because it should be ideas that win, not hierarchy.
Yes. It's just Pedro. Sorry, I don't want to.
No problem.
Don't forget what you're saying. But no, my take was more on not on age per se. My take was more on these dynamics of globalization and digitalization. If this sort of homogenized more the way people work and think. And these digital natives probably are more subject to these influences. Do you see what I mean?
I do. I was pulling your leg, Anna.
I know it. I love it. So Pedro,
maybe what I should just want, sorry, Anna, sorry, Pedro. Just I agree with your point, Luisa, on being part of the tribe, and I will add to that also a strong company culture help to attract talent, and more importantly to retain those talents, because they want to be part of that tribe. And this day where it's talent, it's essential and it's so difficult, and it's really important to take that into account. And when we start actually to build the Natixis in Porto, at that time no one knows about Natixis. And the challenge that I had in terms of hiring was super high, especially in IT, and we had to hire 500 people just the first year, and I was like, how can I do that without people knowing us? And with Nadia, actually, that Anna, we build that. We focus a lot on culture with the head of HR to make sure that we can not only we can attract people, but we can keep our team, because they feel proud. They have this sense of belonging. They feel proud of being part of that tribe. And this is super important. So not only it helps you to brand your identity, so you can really sell a brand through your culture, but more importantly, it really helps you to keep your talent and also to have your talent to have this sense of belonging and the pride to really perform and to go beyond to what is their job description, and so to create more, to have more creativity, more innovation, and more performance. So it's really this circle that really start with this tribe that I agree with you, Luisa, is super important.
Just one comment, Anna, to digital and digital natives. I think you are on to something really important. There's no doubt that digital as a concept, or native or really very acquired, but is another, maybe not a glue, but a vehicle that allows for connections in different ways than perhaps in the past. And most of them, I think, extremely good, okay? And is contributing to cross-cultural understanding, I think, in new ways. I lived that a bit in SAP. I will always remember an example in India where, I could see we were doing pro bono courses and giving people digital skills, and how actually people from a village who were analphabets in literacy terms leapfrogged into key digital knowledge to be able to, for example, do your seamstress patterns on your PC, but not knowing how to read and write in the classical way, right? And I think that created bridges culturally that I think in the past would perhaps not have been possible. This is an extreme case. I think there are many, many more others, how digital, I think, can work as a transparency driver in culture and a connector. And I think younger generations will be more open to that than perhaps generations that didn't grow up with digital as part and parcel of their life. That's maybe an aspect of that part that you were maybe going, Anna, for.
Yeah, and this part of the technology that at the same time that, can put us together, at the same time can allow us to see better the differences and even adapt more to the differences. And in the end, it can even highlight more the cultural specificities of each of us, or each of our cultures. But you were, Louisa, talking about a concept of community when you mentioned tribes, but also when you were mentioning that within the luxury sector, for example, you find a lot of similarities in different nationalities and different cultures. And this is quite interesting. And I was thinking that, Nathalie, you have 19 nationalities here in the offices in Portugal, and you have to create this sense of community, not only here, but also, with the other offices you have around the world. And this connects us to one question that we have already from one of the participants here, that is asking you how to create positive culture, foster and maintain across borders, and how to recruit according to the positive company culture. So I think in a certain way, this is linked to what you have commented before, and Louisa as well, but also with this concept of community. So how do you do it? How you create this positive culture and keep it?
It's a vast question, but I will say I would say you don't really create the culture, because the culture is really, it's a shared story of a company. It's references, it's attitude. As I said, it's a way of doing business, a way of acting, it's values, is really, this is your culture. However, to really being able to embark everyone and create that community, I think it's important that you have keywords and this need to be really, I will say, it can be built with a collaborative approach, but at the end, it needs to be really embed by the senior management, because exemplarity in culture is essential. You cannot say, for example, we value collective intelligence and by yourself act as an individual. So you need to make sure that at all levels of the company, everyone acts embed in their day-to-day that the culture that you really want to and you want to inspire your people of that. So this is a way, for me, is the number one in positive culture. If you do not act that way, don't ask your people to be positive. Then you have a lot of, I will say, events that is important to obviously, I mean, these days with the COVID, it has been more difficult. But thanks God, the technology is also helping us now. But there is a lot of way where you can enable people to spend time together, and not only when there is issue. I think it's really important to allow people and to create those different type of events, so people from all over the globe can really better know each other. And I'm not asking for things that are quite expensive. You can do really easy things that doesn't cost that much money, and to allow people to better know each other. And then you need also to make sure that whatever you say as part of your culture is also embodied in the way you're doing business, but also with your customer. And it's all, I mean, all this community between the employee, the management, the board, the partners, and the customer. I mean, at the end, if they don't share those same values that are part of your culture, something will be missing. And this consistency, it's super important. You cannot say, okay, we're green and we support the environment at the same time to be a bank that will finance charcoal. You need to be consistent in the way you're doing business, with the way you're acting, and with the choice of your customer. So you need also to have the courage sometimes to say no, because it's not part of your culture. So there is many other way of developing the culture, but it's definitely for me exemplarity, consistency are super important across the globe.
And we have one more question that links to this one and also to one of Anna's question. We have here, adding on Anna's question, and I think this is to you, Louisa, how can the younger generation influence the changes in companies' culture that are operating in more traditional countries? Any tips? Or are such changes not on the younger hands?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I'm a big believer that change is driven bottom up and top down, and the combination of both, and sometimes the tension in both, is what really makes change happen. So I think it's crucial that the younger generations, in that sense, or let's call it those who think differently, I prefer that those who think differently really drive through their energy and their conviction, change. Then I think it is very important that both bottom up and top down, you learn how to do this. And I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the judge, the federal judge in the US, who said that you should drive change, but you should bring others with you, right? I think only then change really makes a difference. So learning how to bring others along and how to bubble up change and evolve, I think is what's needed. And it's needed also in perhaps more traditional setups, business or society-wise, but it depends how you do it. And, change is not something you change overnight. Change is done step by step. You lean into change as opposed to today it's A and tomorrow it's B. So I think, and youth certainly has one thing for itself, which is energy. And I think to drive change and to lead, I think energy is key. Because also don't forget, nobody follows anybody to hell, right? Or to anything that's boring or to anything that is disenergizing. So I think that's my biggest tip. But using what Nathalie said before, it's about 5 C's in my view about how to lead this. It's about courage, it's about conviction, it's about coherence, it's also about compassion. And, you know, if you are the young shot rock star who wants to change the older person, show a bit of compassion, right? Don't say that, you know, it works both ways, right? And then I think also I have learned over time, and not just because I worked a long time in luxury and in fashion, do it with a bit of class. I think that's important because at the end, you know, change means that people have to question themselves, and you have to do it with a certain style to bring people along. And the worst thing in change is to tell the person who has to change that everything was wrong so far, right? Now we will do it right. I mean, you immediately lost that person because he or she may have given the past 20 years to something and now it's all wrong. So really important to build on strength and leap forward. And the really most important advice I can give, if I was again 25, learning about change. You know, I was very enamored with books about leadership and, you know, all of that. I think that's great, but leadership and change are intrinsically connected. And now through today, we add on culture. And if you look at those 3 themes and really make them the themes of how you develop yourself, I think you will create a pretty holistic package for yourself as a professional and frankly also personal leader.
I'd like to follow on a dimension of change that is very important, and nowadays, especially in this hyper-competitive world that we live in, that is innovation. Because knowing you, I know that you are, you know, passionate about, both of you are passionate about innovation and about bringing the best in your teams. And when you want to spur innovation, do you have any advice on how to do that? Also, going back to the sort of more stricto sensu aspect of national culture, in your experience in various countries, did you find an environment, it can be also in different sectors, a national or sectoral based answer, did you find an example of, or could you give us an example of a sector or a national culture that was more prone to accepting innovation? Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I can on one example, something that I really found super powerful to bring innovation and to bring change in a company is what I call sounding boards, or it's also called some type of shadow cabinet. And the way it is organized is that so some companies have that very well organized and very well structured, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, where next to the executive committee, but you can also have that in other type of at a lower level, you do have like a shadow cabinet, which is people that are somewhat different than your executive committee. So if your executive committee is quite old, you put more younger people. If your executive committee is a lot with people with more financial background, you put people that are different type of background. So you build your shadow cabinet or your sounding board with a team that is selected because they are diverse and because their main goal is really to challenge all the decisions of the executive committee. And so you give them the same agenda you give to the executive committee, and then you match the decision that is made by the shadow cabinet versus the executive committee. So you can do that in a very well structured. I mean, there is some company who's like AIG, for example, in the insurance business, who is doing that, and or you can also do that in I will say in a less structured way, but in your ManCo, your management committee. The idea is, again, is always to have some people that can view a decision or a need to take a decision and bring you a different perspective. Why also is good is because when you stay with your team, there is this tendency of they want to please you. And then the fact that people want to please you prevent creativity, prevent you to take risk, or prevent your team also to bring you new ideas because they're afraid to take risk. By having this type of shadow cabinet or sounding board, you have internal people, you stay internal, but you have people who are not here to please you because their role is really to challenge the idea and to bring a new perspective. And so I found that super powerful, and I've been trying. So it's more difficult in a French environment, I have to say, that in the US you have also this type of sounding boards a lot. But I think it really helped every one of us, especially the leaders, to really bring some new perspective and then to bring some innovation. So it's definitely one of the most powerful ideas that I have seen in global company on how to bring innovation.
Mm-hmm. Luisa?
I have 4 examples, and hopefully each of them can be reapplied. The first one is very methodical, and it's called design thinking. And it is what was at the time and has developed very strongly at SAP, really made an incredibly hierarchical, organized, in SAP you wouldn't do anything without a work stream and an Excel sheet and all that stuff. And the question was, how do we innovate for the end user, actually? How do we really design software that will solve a problem that nobody has thought about in a totally intuitive, great way, etc. And design thinking, for me, is an incredibly powerful method to strive for creativity and innovation in very organized context. So that was one. The other one is what my experience in Nordic. When I was there, this was the beginning of digital marketing, social, you name it. And half of the time, I did not understand what my very, very young team members were talking about that they wanted to do. And the typical hierarchical way would have been to ask them so many intelligent questions that at the end the idea would be killed just because I would have, killed them with my questions and, the numbers and all of it. And at a certain point, I understood that if I really wanted to get the best out of them was to have an agreement. And we agreed the first year, I remember, every quarter you can go and do something. And, there's X money for it. I don't understand what it is. I don't need to, but, go and prove to me that it really can bring something, right? Imagine launching a new shampoo without TV and, no marketing, but social influences. And, in 2007 and 8, I don't think anybody knew what these influencers were and who they were and how this worked and whatever, because we thought we needed TV spots, right? And therefore launch was a very expensive thing. And I learned how that trust builds performance and totally new ways. Or we did then some advertising that, the rest of Europe didn't understand, but was very interesting in the Nordic way. And again, because we trusted, and then we started to prove. But when you trust, you verify. And verify means there needs to be very clear KPIs, right? The other one is in Italy. I had many designers, almost 100, for the glasses. And, the designer soul is very different, and it is truly important to drive innovation with, both right and left side of the brain in a way that gives security as well and confidence to a designer, particularly if he or she wants to try out something totally new. And then it's not about, oh my God, this is ugly, right? If you do that, you kill anything. It may not yet be perfect for selling, but he or she may have an idea there of a new material, a new combination, etc. So this very caring yet stretching way of leading depends very much if you have to do with people who are not intellectually driven primarily, but with their heart and aesthetics, etc. So I think those are a few of these areas. At IKEA, the fantastic thing is that innovation is bred by leaving space to people to serve the many always better, creating always better life, everyday life for the many, and that's what guides everybody. And if you have an idea in that very broad umbrella, you are encouraged to come up with the idea no matter what your job is. And therefore, I think freedom breeds innovation if it is within a clear framework. Those would be my 4 ideas.
And I will add, Luisa, I totally agree with what you say. I will add also, there's something that is super important. It is is really in your performance management, add that innovation. And it's not anymore about result. It's how many ideas you put on the table. It's not how many ideas were successful. It's how many ideas first you put on the table. Because today, most of the company, the way we are appraisal our employee is really very traditional and do not really allow space for creativity. So if we really, if you really want to force people to think innovation, to bring new ideas, to dare, because this is really also it's super important, to dare to try to you really need to add that into your performance management process, and making sure that you allowed mistake. And in most of the traditional company, mistake are really, and especially in Europe, in the United States, I saw this quite different. But in Europe, I noticed that people are blamed for mistake, and you're doing one mistake, it's a shame. And actually, we should value mistake if we want innovation. So really, this performance management process is really important in the way if you really want to bring some innovation in companies.
I fully agree, and I would add on another angle of also something that traditionally is not fostering innovation, and it is these old-fashioned hierarchical functional organization designs. Because typically innovation is bred through connections that are unexpected, it's not like you invent something from scratch, from nothing, right? You typically make connections and see something in that connection that nobody else saw before, right? And I think the functional, traditional kind of setup of most big organizations, which is like an army, right? There are different levels and everybody's in a function. And, if you want to change functions, you have to start again and go up the ladder, is not how life is. It's not how work actually happens. That's why today we talk about agile, we talk multifunctional teams, we talk about lots of different ways of organizing. And I think it's super important to foster those alongside with the performance management you were talking. And I think career paths then become also very different. You go deep, but you also go broad, and you create talents that are able by definition to innovate. And you don't need to tell them, one day a week you can also innovate, by the way, right? That was also a school, I think 10 years ago, they were talking, we remember discussions about that. Should we have an innovation afternoon? It's not badly intended, but that's again not how work works, right?
And to go back to our former subject, culture, a strong culture can break down the boundaries between siloed teams and really help to create those link and help to foster that innovation between teams. I agree.
It's true, but for example, and this can bring us back to one of the main topics of today, which is in Sweden, and if we talk about cultural dimensions, you have a much more egalitarian culture in terms of leadership. In Portugal, for example, is more hierarchical, and if you go to Japan or to China, it might be even more. So how that has an impact? Because when you, for example, Louisa, you were talking about, having everybody not afraid of participating in the decisions and, participating in the innovation process. It's because in Sweden, it's much more flat. Do you see those differences between, this more egalitarian culture in Sweden and in Portugal, more hierarchical, having an impact on how you innovate?
Listen, clearly those differences exist in society. That's how societies are set up. I agree. If you go into companies, if you don't do anything, you may end up with a reflection of how society is. However, if you're a company leader, you're supposed to take whatever you are here to do, package that into a purpose and decide what culture will make you faster, better, and more agile, and you name it, right?
And then you create the community you were talking about before.
And you take the good things from the Portuguese society, but you also even out with the others. And also, let's be clear, not everything is perfect in Sweden. You know, Sweden may be egalitarian, but to make them sell batteries, I can tell you it was hard work, because the Swedish psyche believes that you don't need to sell what's good. It sells by itself. Okay. And, you know, batteries, if you don't sell them, nobody buys them, right? They will buy a private label, right? Obviously, because there's not really a huge differentiator. So I think it is the leader's role. And as a consequence, I think, you know, everybody who is part of the company can contribute on this. And look at the super startups in Portugal. Look also at some of the fantastic companies we have. I just saw the most recent ad of Renova. I just find it brilliant. You know, is that Portuguese? I don't think so. It's whatever Renova needs, right? And you should go and look at the ad. I will not describe it because probably that's not fitting with the Portugal Business School. But it's a super ad. It is not Portuguese. It's nothing. It's Renova. Yet it has a lot of Portugal values in there that made Renova what it is today, right?
Exactly. We have a lot of questions here, but we don't have time, right? And I don't know, because I know that Luisa has an important appointment now at 7 o'clock.
Yes, I think considering the very large group of questions, I think we should stop here, because it's been, although of course for us we will be delighted to be here till the end of time, but it's, you know, I think we have already so much to take in, to reflect upon, that I think, yes, it would be good also to end in beauty. And yes, Louise, I've seen the ads by Renova. I already congratulated Paulo Pereira da Silva for that. It's fantastic. Yes, whoever didn't see it, please go and see it. They are really great. So,
but if you want, we can answer some of the questions in writing. I'm sure Nathalie and I can divide them up.
Exactly, that was my point. I agree with Luisa. If people wants to, we can get back and with a writing answer, and I will be pleased to do so.
And we'll be delighted to have you in one of your next visits, whenever it suits you, to Porto, to come to the school and, you know, share some time, even if we can create an informal meeting, you know, just, you know, at Porto Business School.
Yeah, that will be another good reason for me to come back, Anna. Yeah. So
and be delighted as well.
Most welcome. So really, on behalf of Pedro, myself, and the Porto Business School, we would like to thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. I'm sure our participants enjoyed as much as we did. Pedro and I are really happy to have you in this event, and really we look forward to seeing you, you know, in a sort of not pandemic mood in person. But while that's not possible, this has been already a great opportunity. So really, thank you so much, Louise and Nathalie, and I look forward to seeing you again in person.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you for organizing this event. A great topics, and it was really nice seeing you today. And as Anna say, hopefully next time we'll see you in person.
Yes, and thank you to our participants at home. Thank you to the prospective students of this new Executive Master, who is really flexible, all in English, etc. You know, has lots of interesting features. So we hope you can join us in future events, also to the participants. And well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank you.